Welcome back to another video. Today's video, second video in a row about camera stuff, but I'm really interested in camera gear and all that. I'm just super nerd for that stuff. So I figured I'd share my knowledge with you. Today's video, we're going to be talking all about frame rates, why we use certain ones, how to use them, and all that and more. So yes, you might be confused. We have 25.97, we have 25 frames a second, 30 frames a second, we have 24 frames a second, we have 23 frames a second, we have 60 frames a second, we have 50 frames a second, we have 48 frames a second, 120 frames a second, 240, 300, 980, and it just goes on and on. Your iPhone can shoot up to 1080 240, which is slow-mo. But we really need to go back to, first of all, to 24. How to properly use the frame rates. Because this is something that a lot of people do not know. A lot of people will shoot 24 frames a second for the sake of it. Because, oh, it's the filmic look, I want to make it look cinematic. No, you don't need it. While yes, it's nice, the average person will not notice the difference. 30 frames a second is the most ideal frame rate you can possibly use in your filming style. Unless you're filming something that is intended to be cinematic, like a B-roll sequence or whatever. Yeah, you don't need it. Another common mistake when working with frame rates is mixing and matching frame rates in a timeline. So, if you film a video in 60 frames a second, you should import that video to the timeline as 64 frames a second and export as 60 frames a second. When you export in, for example, you import it as 60, but you cut it down to 30 and export as 30, what you're doing is it's artificially cutting out half the frames. So that can lead to the footage not looking as good. It doesn't really happen with 30 to 60, but a common rule which should be followed is if you film something in a lower resolution, if you film something in a lower frame rate, you should not upscale the frame rate because that will lead to the footage coming out a bit more, it won't be as smooth, it won't be as futile, all that. But if you wish to downscale, so you shoot in 60, but you choose to edit your project in 30 and export as 30, you need to make sure that all the footage you're importing to your timeline actually is 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second, because if you mix and match your frame rates, while it probably will work, it's not going to give the best results. For optimum results, you should always edit, import, and upload in the same resolution and frame rate. Now let's talk about 24 frames a second. The cinematic frame rate, you could call it. No. The historical reason that we shoot 24 frames a second is traditionally on Panavision cameras and IMAX cameras had a roll of film in them that was rolled up when you start filming. It was filmed obviously onto tape and it was developed in a dark room. But due to the introduction of more modern digital cameras, while yes, people still shoot 24 frames a second, it's not essential anymore. While the file sizes might be a tad bit bigger, it's not actually that bad. The reason they shot in 24 frames a second is to save money on film, because it costs more to print more frames, and they could actually record less if they had less frames. If they had more frames, sorry. So that is why they have the traditional aspect of 24 frames per second. Now let's talk about 30. This will be the NTSC standard or the PAL standard. This is the most common resolution, the finest resolution you could record at. I film my videos in 30 frames a second. This is because 30 frames a second is a happy middle ground between 24 frames a second and 68 frames a second. It has less storage. I can downscale it to 24 if I want to. I can slow it down. And televisions and all that. That's what they shoot on. You'll never see a movie, apart from The Hobbit, that actually is shot in 60 frames a second. Even though some films could actually benefit from it. And 60 frames a second is the most lifelike format. It makes it feel like you're there. I know YouTubers such as Tailosive Tech do film in 60 frames a second. That's their preference. And I personally edit and shoot and upload 24 frames a second. Unless the project calls for it. Which brings me into my next section on this. Slowing down your video or speeding it up. If you want to upload a video in 24 frames a second, but you want to have it slower motion, you can slow down the video by a certain amount with 24 frames a second. It's about 2 times if you want it to look optimal. Whereas if you look at it in 30 frames a second, you can slow it down a bit more. And 60 frames a second, you can slow it down even more, about 4 times, 4.5 times. Which leads to the fact that you can actually slow down your video. So when you have to upload a music video, for example, and you want it to look cinematic, but you also want to make it look slower and more, slower, more chill vibe, that's when directors will choose to film in 60 so they can slow down the music. And then what do they do for the singers in those music videos? Because obviously they can't have them slow talking because they have to lip sync. Well, what happens is they get the actors to lip sync to a faster version of their song and then they sync it up in post. So that is frame rates explained. Thanks for watching and I'll catch you next.